The conference room buzzed with the low hum of conversation. I glanced at my phone, its screen illuminated with an incoming call from Ethan. I excused myself, stepping into the hallway, anticipating the usual pleasantries, the obligatory, "How was the trip?" or "When are you coming home?" Instead, Ethan's voice, cold and dripping with a smug satisfaction, cut through the air. The remainder of the day unfolded in a blur. I sat through client meetings, nodding at precisely the right moments, my mind racing a whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Ethan thought he'd won. He believed he could pull the rug out from under me, sell the home I'd poured my heart and soul into, and walk away scotangent-free. But he was overlooking one crucial detail. "Hate you," I let out a bitter laugh. "No, Ethan, I don't hate you. I feel sorry for you. You had everything. Someone who loved you, a home we built together. And you threw it all away because you couldn't see past your own ego." I stood, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. "I want you out of here by the end of the day. Take your things and figure out where you're going to stay. This is the last time I'm giving you any grace." He opened his mouth to argue but stopped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll go." "Good," I said, walking toward the door. "And don't even think about trying anything else. Chloe's already handling everything, and the next time you cross a line, I won't hesitate to let the courts handle it." As I opened the door, Ethan slowly stood, grabbing his coat. He didn't look at me as he walked out, his footsteps heavy with defeat. For a moment I felt a pang of sadness. Not for him, but for the life we could have had if he'd been the man I thought he was. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by a profound sense of relief. I closed the door behind him, locking it with the new key I'd had made. This was my home now, and no one, especially not Ethan, would ever take it away from me again. The silence in the apartment after Ethan left was deafening. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The space no longer felt heavy with his presence, his entitled demands, or his insidious lies. It was just me, the home I'd built, and the quiet realization that I had won, not just against him, but against every doubt I'd ever harbored about standing up for myself. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the emptiness where his things had been, his oversized gaming chair, the framed jerseys that had cluttered the walls, the gaudy coffee table he'd insisted on keeping, all gone. The apartment looked cleaner, brighter, as if it were truly mine again. For months, the apartment deed had been solely in my name. I'd had it transferred after we refinanced earlier in the year, a move Ethan had readily agreed to without a second thought since it meant a lower interest rate. He'd never bothered to scrutinize the details or even glance at the paperwork he'd signed. His carelessness, his breathtaking arrogance was about to be his undoing. Lauren came by that evening with takeout and a bottle of wine. "Is he really gone?" she asked, plopping down on the couch with a dramatic sigh. "Gone and not coming back," I said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. I gave him until the end of the day to pack his things. He didn't argue. Lauren raised her glass. "To fresh starts and well-deserved victories." I clinked my glass against hers, feeling the weight of the past week, slowly lifting the lingering residue of resentment and self-doubt beginning to dissipate. Never again would I allow someone to walk all over me. Over the next few days, I began to reclaim the apartment piece by piece. I rearranged the furniture, moved my favorite artwork into the living room, and filled the space with things that brought me joy. It wasn't just about redecorating. It was about transforming the apartment into a reflection of who I was, not the person Ethan had tried to make me. Chloe called with updates on the legal proceedings, her voice filled with the kind of unshakable confidence that made me feel invincible. "The fraud charges are off the table since the buyer decided not to pursue them," she explained, "but the divorce paperwork is moving along smoothly. Once Ethan signs, you'll be officially free." Hearing the word free made my chest tighten. It wasn't just about the divorce. It was about everything I'd been carrying for years. The resentment, the self-doubt, the feeling of being trapped in a marriage that didn't value me. It was all finally being lifted. By the time I returned to my hotel room that evening, my initial shock had solidified into steely resolve. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. Ethan wanted a fight, fine. This was a fight I was determined to win. Ethan tried to reach out a few times. His messages ranged from half-hearted apologies to pathetic attempts to guilt me into reconciliation. "I made a mistake," one read. "Can't we at least talk about this?" Another was more desperate. "You're going to ruin me, Amelia. Is that what you want?" I didn't reply. For once, I wasn't going to waste my energy trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. He'd made his choices, and now he was dealing with the consequences. By the end of the week, the apartment felt like a completely new space, warm, inviting, and entirely mine. As I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, the city lights twinkling outside the window, I reflected on everything that had happened. Ethan's betrayal had been a shock, but it had also served as a profound wake-up call. For too long, I'd allowed myself to believe that I didn't deserve better, that I had to settle for whatever scraps of respect and love he deigned to offer. But now I knew better. I wasn't just reclaiming my apartment, I was reclaiming my life. A month later, my life looked completely different. The apartment was unrecognizable not because of any drastic renovation, but because of how at times felt asterisk. It was a space that reflected me, my tastes, my personality, and my newfound independence. The absence of Ethan's clutter and his overbearing presence made the home feel lighter, freer, more genuinely mine. The divorce was moving along smoothly. Chloe had handled everything with precision, ensuring Ethan had no room to argue or complicate the process. He signed the papers without much fuss, likely realizing he had no leverage. There was no grand showdown, no emotional plea to work things out, just a cold, clean break that felt both bittersweet and deeply satisfying. One day, while sorting through some old papers, I came across a photograph of Ethan and me from our early years together. We were smiling arms around each other, full of hope and promise. I stared at it for a moment, letting the memories wash over me. There had been good times, moments when I truly believed we were building a life together. But those moments were gone, overshadowed by years of neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. I tucked the photo into an envelope and put it away in a drawer. It wasn't worth keeping out in the open, but I wasn't ready to throw it away either. It was a part of my past, but it didn't define me anymore. My first call was to Chloe, my lawyer and longtime friend. I meticulously laid out the situation, my voice remarkably calm, even as my pulse pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Lauren and I celebrated the finalized divorce with dinner and drinks at a trendy rooftop bar downtown. "Your glow-up is going," she said, raising her cocktail in a toast. "Single life suits you." "It's not the single life," I said, laughing, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "It's the freedom. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm living under someone else's rules." We toasted to that, and as the night went on, I felt a growing sense of pride in myself. I'd faced one of the hardest moments of my life and emerged stronger. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Back at home, I started planning for the future. The apartment had become more than a refuge. It was a symbol of everything I'd reclaimed. But I knew I wouldn't stay there forever. Someday I'd move to a new place, one without any lingering shadows of my life with Ethan. Until then, I was determined to make the most of every moment in the space I'd fought so hard to keep. As I curled up on the couch that night, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I thought about how Ethan had laughed during that phone call, so certain that he'd won, and I couldn't help but smile. His arrogance had been his downfall, and my quiet strength had been my salvation. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I called the shots, one where I chose happiness on my own terms. And after a long, arduous journey, I felt truly, deeply free. "He sold the apartment." Chloe repeated, her disbelief palpable. "Does he even realize he can't do that without your consent?" "Apparently not," I replied, a hint of amusement creeping into my tone. "He thinks he's already spent the money on his new life with Olivia." Chloe chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. "Well, he's in for a rude awakening," she said. "The sale is invalid. You can prove sole ownership, and if he's taken any money from the buyer, he's on the hook for fraud." The word fraud sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated satisfaction through me. "What do we need to do?" I asked, already feeling a surge of power coursing through my veins. "I'm divorcing you," he stated, his tone almost triumphant. "I've already sold the apartment, so you'll need to figure out where you're going to live. First, we'll notify the buyer that the sale isn't legal," Chloe explained. "Then we'll draft a formal letter for Ethan outlining the consequences of his actions. If he's dumb enough to try anything else, we'll take him to court." As I hung up the phone, a profound sense of calm settled over me. Ethan thought he'd outsmarted me, leaving me powerless and scrambling. In reality, he'd inadvertently set himself up for the ultimate humiliation. I spent the rest of my trip focusing intently on my work, compartmentalizing my emotions, channeling my energy into the task at hand. The betrayal stung deeply and painfully, but the prospect of reclaiming my life, of watching Ethan's smug facade crumble, infused me with a renewed sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. When I boarded the plane home, I was ready. Ready to confront Ethan, ready to dismantle his carefully constructed lies, ready to begin a new chapter without him. This wasn't simply about winning. It was about reclaiming control of my life, my narrative, my future. The flight home provided ample time for reflection, for piecing together the unraveling of my marriage. Ethan's arrogance was staggering. He hadn't even attempted to conceal his betrayal, as if I were merely an obstacle to be bulldozed on his path to freedom. But instead of succumbing to the all-consuming rage threatening to consume me, I focused on the actions I would take upon my return. Ethan thought I was powerless, a pawn in his game. He didn't realize I'd been playing the long game all along without even realizing it. As the plane touched down, my first call was to Chloe. "I'm back," I said, hauling my suitcase off the luggage carousel. "What's the next step?" "We've already notified the buyer," she replied, her tone brisk and efficient. "They were shocked to say the least and not too happy with Ethan. They're willing to cooperate, which helps our case." And Ethan, I asked, my anticipation building with every passing second. The audacity of it all, the complete and utter lack of remorse, was almost laughable in its brazenness. My hand tightened around the phone as the weight of his words settled upon me. "I sent the formal letter to his email this morning," she said. "It outlines the illegality of the sale, your sole ownership of the apartment, and the potential consequences of fraud. He hasn't responded yet, but if I had to guess, he's going to be furious." Good, I thought, a small smile playing on my lips. Let him stew in his own self-made misery. When I arrived home, the apartment was eerily quiet. Ethan's belongings were still there. His jackets draped over a chair, his shoes carelessly tossed near the door. But the atmosphere felt different, as if the very energy of the space had shifted. I took a deep breath and set down my suitcase, knowing that the inevitable confrontation wouldn't be long in coming. Sure enough, Ethan stormed in that evening, his face flushed with anger, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, waving the letter Chloe had sent. "You're telling me I can't sell the apartment? It's half mine." "No, Ethan," I said calmly, crossing my arms. "It's not. The deed has been in my name for months. You can't sell something you don't own." He froze, his face a mask of confusion and simmering rage. "What are you talking about?" I retrieved the deed from the file I'd prepared, holding it up for him to see. "After we refinanced, I had the deed transferred to my name. You signed off on it, remember? Or did you just skim the paperwork like you always do?" "You sold the apartment?" I asked, striving to maintain a steady voice, a composure I didn't quite feel. For a moment he was speechless. Then his expression twisted into a sneer. "You think you're so smart, don't you? This doesn't change anything. I already made a deal, and you're going to look like a fool when it all falls apart." I stared at him, unwavering, my gaze steady and unflinching. "The sale is already void, Ethan. The buyer knows it, and they're ready to take legal action if you don't return the money. Oh, and speaking of money," I took a step closer, lowering my voice, "if you've spent a single cent of that deposit, you're in even bigger trouble." Ethan's confidence faltered for the first time. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "You've spent years treating me like I'm too naive to notice what you're doing, but guess what, Ethan? I've been paying attention. And now you're going to deal with the consequences." He began pacing, his frustration mounting. "This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. You can't just kick me out of here." I raised an eyebrow, a subtle but deliberate gesture. "Yeah," he replied with a dry, almost cruel laugh. "Olivia and I need the money to set up our life together. She deserves better than a tiny place like that anyway. Actually, I can. This apartment is legally mine. You can stay here for now, but only because I'm giving you the courtesy of time to figure out your next move. But let me be perfectly clear, I'm not going anywhere." Over the next few days, Ethan's anger morphed into desperation. He bombarded me with repeated calls, leaving frantic voicemails that vacillated between pleading and thinly veiled threats. Meanwhile, Chloe worked diligently behind the scenes, ensuring every loose end was meticulously tied up. The buyer rescinded the agreement, furious at Ethan for wasting their time and money, and Chloe drafted the preliminary paperwork for the divorce proceedings. "You're in a good position," Amelia Chloe told me during one of our meetings. "Ethan has no leverage here. Between the voided sale and the fraud charges hanging over his head, he'll have to cooperate if he wants to avoid a bigger mess." Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit, but they also served as a stark reminder of how much I'd allowed Ethan to control my life for years. I'd ignored his dismissiveness and arrogance, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. Now I saw the extent of what I'd been sacrificing, and I was determined to reclaim it all. Laura, my best friend, came over one evening to help me reorganize the apartment. We carefully boxed up Ethan's belongings, stacking them neatly in a corner of the living room. "How's he taking all this?" she asked, holding up one of Ethan's tie with a smirk. "Not well," I said, laughing despite myself. "He's still convinced he can talk his way out of it, but I'm not budging." "Good," she said, tossing the tie into the box. "He doesn't deserve a single inch of your space or your time." I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for her unwavering support. For so long I'd felt isolated in my marriage, shouldering the emotional and financial burden while Ethan took credit for everything. But now I had people in my corner, and that made all the difference. The final piece of my plan fell into place the day Ethan brought Olivia to the apartment. I was sitting at the dining table reviewing some paperwork when they walked in as if they owned the place. Olivia looked around with a smug smile, her arm linked through Ethan's. Olivia. The name stung a sharp, unexpected blow. For months I'd suspected infidelity. Ethan's late nights, his increasingly frequent and unexplained business trips, the growing emotional distance between us. All the signs had pointed to a third party. But to hear him casually mention her name as if times were the intruder in their burgeoning romance ignited a furious fire within my chest. "So this is where we're staying," she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. I stood, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. "No," I said firmly. "This is where Ethan was staying. You, Olivia, won't be staying here at all." Her smile faltered. She glanced at Ethan, who looked equally stunned. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," I said, gesturing to the apartment, "is my home. Not yours, not hers, and certainly not a hotel for you to shack up in after stabbing me in the back." Olivia's expression turned icy, but she remained silent. Ethan, on the other hand, looked ready to explode. "You can't do this," he shouted. "You're being unreasonable." I met his gaze unflinching. "No, Ethan. What's unreasonable is thinking you could sell my home, walk away with the money, and expect me to just roll over. You're lucky I haven't filed criminal charges. For now." "Sounds good," I replied, my voice, even betraying none of the turmoil raging within. There was no way I was going to give him the satisfaction of hearing me crack. Ethan stood in the doorway, his face red with frustration, while Olivia crossed her arms, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "You're being ridiculous, Amelia," he said, his voice laced with desperation. "You can't just kick me out of my own home." I took a step forward, my voice calm but unwavering. "This is my home, Ethan. The deed has been in my name for months, and you know that. You signed the paperwork without even reading it, just like you always do. So no, this isn't your home anymore." Olivia glanced at Ethan, her perfectly manicured hand tightening around her purse strap. "Wait, what's she talking about?" she asked, her tone sharp. "You said this was your apartment, that you sold it." He flinched, attempting to wave her off. "It's complicated. I'll handle it." "Oh, it's not complicated," I said, stepping closer. "You tried to sell an apartment that doesn't belong to you. That sale is void, Ethan, and as of right now, you don't have a leg to stand on." Olivia's composure finally cracked. "My name is Amelia, and until that phone call, I believed I'd married a man I could trust. Ethan and I had been together for 6 years. While our relationship hadn't always been idyllic, I genuinely believed in our partnership. We'd worked tirelessly to buy our apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom in the city that had captured my heart the moment I saw it. It wasn't just a home, it was a tangible symbol of everything we'd built together. Or so I'd thought. "You mean the money you told me you had?" She stopped mid-sentence, her voice rising. "Oh my God, did you lie about that too?" "Fraud," she whispered, taking a step away from him. "Are you serious?" "Yes, fraud," I said, crossing my arms. "And I'm prepared to press charges if he doesn't get his things and leave by the end of the day." Ethan's facade finally crumbled. "You can't do this, Amelia," he said, his voice pleading. "We've been together for 6 years. You can't just throw me out." "You threw me out the moment you made that phone call," I said, my voice hardening. "You told me you were divorcing me and laughed about me having to find a new place to live. You didn't just betray me, Ethan, you tried to ruin me. So don't stand there and act like you're the victim." Olivia took another step back, her eyes darting between us. "This is insane," she muttered, clutching her purse tighter. "You didn't tell me any of this, Ethan. You said you had everything handled." He turned to her, desperation etched on his face. "Olivia, I can fix this. I just need." Looking back, there had been subtle signs, hairline fractures in the foundation of our relationship that I'd foolishly overlooked. Ethan's dismissive attitude whenever I inquired about our finances, his tendency to brush aside my concerns with a charming smile and a perfunctory kiss. I'd always attributed his unwavering confidence to his shrewd financial acumen. Now I realized it stemmed from a calculated ability to manipulate me. She cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't. Just don't. I'm not getting dragged into your mess." Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving him standing there stunned. I couldn't help but smile as the door clicked shut behind her. "Looks like you're on your own," I said, turning back to Ethan. "Now let's talk about what happens next." He slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "Amelia, please. I screwed up. I know that, but you don't have to do this." "You're right," I said, grabbing a folder from the kitchen counter and setting it on the coffee table in front of him. I don't times have times to do this, but I times am times going to. This is the divorce paperwork. My lawyer has already drafted it, and I suggest you sign it quickly. The sooner you do, the sooner we can both move on. He stared at the folder, his face pale. You really hate me that much?